If you've done any study of mythology or storytelling, it's certain that you've come across the term hero's journey. This is a term that also gets used often in spiritual circles. I thought I would take the time today to go through the hero's journey cycle, what it means for you as a yogi, and where it comes from. Welcome to the Modern Mystics Podcast. I'm your host, Alana Kaivalya, the Yoga Doctor. I'm here to help you realize your potential as a spiritual leader and elevate your work in the realm of yoga, mysticism, and spirituality. This podcast covers all of our favorite topics: yoga, alchemy, astrology, divination, spirituality, psychology, ritual, and mystical practices both ancient and modern. Get ready to up-level your status as a modern mystic. In the 20th century, a professor named Joseph Campbell was the person who really introduced the world to the hero's journey. He wrote a book entitled The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and it really rocked the world of mythology, but also storytelling. Essentially, what Campbell taught us was that all stories follow a familiar cycle. They feature a hero or a heroine, and this hero or heroine moves through certain trials and tribulations in order to come out the other side as a figure that we all are inspired by or look up to. Now, of course, there are a million stories out there. There are tons of mythologies. There's folklore, there's movies, there's print, there's everything you can imagine in terms of stories. So how could they all follow this one particular cycle? Well, what Joseph Campbell found was that there are similarities, commonalities within the story cycle because there are commonalities within us as humans. Every human has a psyche. Yep, that's right. This is tied in with psychology. And in fact, Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, did a lot of study of Carl Jung and Carl Jung's teachings and philosophy in terms of depth psychology. There is a huge correlation with how and why stories inspire us because of the way we ourselves as human beings transform. So the psyche I've talked about quite a bit in this podcast. In a general way, it's divided into 3 different categories. Our conscious mind, which is our ego, that part of us that interacts with the world. Our unconscious, which really, that's where the gold is buried. And our supraconsciousness, or our higher mind, that's how we connect with the source and something bigger than us. Ideally, in terms of yoga and spirituality, we're going to try to get all of these parts of the psyche to communicate successfully with one another. If we are not doing that and they do not connect with one another or communicate with one another, we end up missing really important opportunities for transformation. The unconscious speaks to us generally through the body, through what we as yogis know as the chakra system, especially in terms of chronic pain or illness. This is the unconscious speaking up and saying, hey, there's something to take a look at here. Our supraconscious mind speaks to us in terms of flashes of insight or inspiration. And boy, if we're not paying attention to those, you know we're missing a lot. So the hero or heroine, and again, this isn't gender specific. I want to be clear about that. Through the rest of this podcast, I may continue to say hero, but I do not mean that in terms of a specific gender. I just mean that in terms of a figure who is moving through this particular psychological cycle. So as we hear about stories, as we work with mythology, as we see our movies that we love, we'll start to recognize this hero figure. And when we are inspired by a particular story or hero, it's because there's something about that figure or that story that resonates with us. This is so important to understand. Not all stories, not all mythologies are going to resonate with every individual. So it's a good thing there's a lot of them out there. We have the opportunity to find the ones that really enliven or enlighten something within us. And when it does that, we understand what we are to do next. One of the things that Joseph Campbell says at the beginning of his book, Hero with a Thousand Faces, is that the journey of the hero is as much overground as it is underground. And what he means by that is that when we move through our life experience, when a hero actually completes or does certain actual physical tasks, yeah, certainly we can see that or read about it, or we can feel that or experience it ourselves, but there's something deeper going on. The underground piece is that psychological journey. It's that piece within us that transforms, because within any story, the hero never starts out as the hero. If we're watching the story or reading the story, we see that potential, but that potential isn't known within the hero, him or herself. So the hero's journey is a process of self-discovery. And isn't yoga the same thing? That as we sit down on our mat to do our meditation or we begin our practice, it's a process of self-discovery. It's a process of knowing thyself. And this is really at the heart or at the crux, not just of the hero's journey, but of true deep psychology practices as taught by Carl Jung. So again, what I want to try and illustrate for you is that mythologies, stories, they're really not about what's out there. They're not about somebody else. They're about us. You see, the brain is extraordinary. When it hears a story that it resonates with, the brain actually lights up as if that story is happening to you. So that resonance with a particular story can help you to understand what myth you are living by. Both Campbell and Jung would encourage us to discover what myth we are living by. And we do this by exploring different mythologies or stories. Mythologies are extraordinary. They are special in that the purpose of a mythology is to point you to something bigger than yourself. It's to point you to the best, most full expression of who you are. We have stories that are more like anecdotes or tales of morality that just hopefully help us to direct our behavior in certain ways. The one that comes to mind are the Grimm's fairy tales. Fairy tales are often tales of morality rather than tales of heroism. So it's not necessarily a type of fairy tale story that we're looking for here, but really a much grander mythology. A mythology that contains a true hero that has accomplished incredible feats in his or her lifetime. And again, this is a non-gender specific experience. So, that way you can import yourself into the mythology that resonates most with you. Now, I want to introduce you to the hero's journey cycle. As I said, there's some predictability to it, and the reason for this is because as humans, yes, we are all individual and unique and special snowflakes, but we are not as unique and individual as we think we are. We definitely take some fairly regulated steps along our journeys throughout life. So let me give you a few highlights of the hero's journey cycle. And this isn't exhaustive. This is really just an introduction. So the hero will start out in a place that we call the known. This is just life as that hero knows it. Nothing's special, nothing's changed. Perhaps it's, they've gotten into a rut. Things are predictable, but there is a shakeup. And this is a very important step. This is the call to adventure. The call to adventure can come in many different forms, but it pushes against what the hero knows about life or to be true. So the call to adventure can be a huge push, like a meteorological event, like a weather event, or it can be a smaller push. Maybe they just see the brochure for a yoga class down the street. Perhaps it's a dramatic or a traumatic traumatic push, the death of a loved one, or perhaps it's an inspiring push, graduation from high school or college. Any of these things that essentially push up against the known universe of the hero is a call to adventure. Now, the most important piece of this call to adventure is that the hero responds. Oftentimes, the hero will say, oh no, I want to stay small. I don't want to do this. I'm not ready for this next step. And I think of Neo in the movie The Matrix, who quite literally receives a phone call from his guide, Morpheus, in his office. And Morpheus says, it's time, Neo, you gotta go. And Neo resists heavily. He doesn't want to do it. He resists the call. But if the call is important enough, it will come again. It will come knocking again. And really, this is free will, right? The hero gets to choose whether to go on this adventure or not to go on this adventure. And this is such an important moment for the hero, because if they choose not to go on the adventure, if they choose to stay small, essentially what they're doing is they're choosing to stay unconscious. They're choosing to remain in that state of disintegration or separation within the psyche. They're choosing not to take a look at what's buried deeply within the unconscious. They're choosing not to hear the inspiration coming from beyond them. And that happens, right? That happens. It's acceptable. It's fine. It just means that there is not a hero's journey going on. Because you have to complete the steps to go on a hero's journey. So you must heed the call. You must accept the call as it comes, even though it will very much pitch you into the unknown. So you will cross a threshold as a hero. You will see this, where suddenly the world as the hero knows it is left behind. You move into an unknown place, an unknown experience. There are new things to learn, new things to discover. And of course, inevitably, anybody trying to discover something new won't get it right the first time. There will be challenges. There will be pitfalls. This is called the road of trials. So throughout the road of trials, oftentimes there will be failure, and that's okay. Failure is actually creating what we like to call temperance. Temperance, if you've ever... Certainly, if you've driven a car, you know that there is tempered glass in the windshield. There's also tempered glass in a lot of buildings. Tempered glass means it's been exposed to heat and flame so that it doesn't shatter. So that if it is cracked, it actually stays together. That's temperance, the exposure to heat, what we as yogis would call tapas, that constant application of energy toward our practice, even if we do not see change. So in this road of trials place, once the hero has left their known world, there are going to be challenges that feel as if the hero is failing. But part of this journey is fortitude, what in Sanskrit we would call titiksha. All right, titiksha is that perseverance, that ability to continue on, even if we don't see results, even if we feel like we're failing, even if things feel hard. This is what creates resilience, spiritual resiliency. This is what allows us to overcome the things that otherwise would have kept us small. One of the other pieces that I think is incredibly valuable to bring up as part of this hero's journey, especially at this stage, is the element of a mentor, a wise mentor. And lots of heroes have wise mentors. The one that comes to mind, of course, is Gandalf for Frodo in The Lord of the Rings. That is a very wise mentor. Gandalf is there as Frodo receives the call, given the ring, initiation to go on the journey. Gandalf is there to support Frodo and give him some elements, some tips, some actual tools to go on the journey. Gandalf gives him initial direction. But if you're familiar with the Lord of the Rings story, and I'm sorry, but here's a spoiler alert, at some point Gandalf actually dies and is no longer there to support Frodo, but has given Frodo a lot of support so far, so that Frodo actually has to do it on his own. We see the same thing in the Harry Potter stories, where Dumbledore is essentially the wise mentor for Harry Potter. And eventually, of course, again, so sorry about this, spoiler alert, but Dumbledore dies too. So there is this concept, this idea within the hero's journey structure that we have a wise mentor. We have somebody to lead us along this very difficult road of trials because we're not sure how to do it. We don't know what to do. For us as yogis, this is the guru. The guru is the teacher, and there's a lot of emphasis placed on the guru in yogic tradition. And what I would love for us to do is reconcile that long tradition of yoga with yoga as it is being practiced now by modern people in the West. There may be some differences, there may be some changes, and anytime a guru or a teacher is present, their purpose, their role is to provide instruction, coaching, tools to help us as we embark on our own journey of transformation, our own hero's journey, to get to a certain point. But at a certain point, every teacher, every guru must be left. Otherwise, that teacher has not done his or her job. If for some reason the student perpetually remains with the teacher forevermore, then that hero's journey cannot be completed. At some point, the hero must actually stand on his or her own 2 feet to say, yes, I am ready for these next steps. I am ready to complete this journey. And what the next stage entails is the true crux of the hero's journey. And this is called the dark night of the soul. This is the moment at which all hope is lost. This is the moment that we feel like everything is turned upside down. We're absolutely in the unknown world. We feel like no one is there to help us. The mentor has gone, or they don't have the tools or resources. Something horrible has happened. We see this in many, many different stories. And you yourself have felt this in your own life. You have been in a point of the dark night of the soul. And I know that because I know that you're human. All humans experience this throughout their lives at many different times in many different ways. And this is the point at which, in a hero's journey, the hero, him or herself, realizes that they are the hero, that they are the ones they've been waiting for, that they have achieved the mastery, the resilience, the learning, the transformation. They've gone through the fire, the tapas. They've developed the temperance. They have persevered, applied titiksha to every single step along the way. And now through this dark night of the soul moment, where at first it seems all hope is lost. You see, that all hope is lost moment, that is the hero defaulting to the life before the journey began. That's the hero defaulting to that original, smaller state of being. We could think of the hero's journey as a spiral upward, right? We're not changing who we are still us, but we are essentially manifesting more full potential, fuller potential of ourselves. We're evolving into bigger greatness, really. And in that dark night of the soul, it is the hero, him or herself, and this is, to reference a very classical hero structure, this is the moment of the slaying of the dragon. So let's consider what a dragon is. Metaphorically, of course. The dragon is a very large, mostly terrifying animal that does one thing, and that is the dragon hoards gold. But honestly, dragon can't really do much with gold. It just protects it with its life. And any hero that approaches a dragon must slay that giant beast in order to reach the most valuable prized possession, that gold. This, of course, is a metaphor for our own lives at this moment of the dark night of the soul, where the great beastly thing, the thing that feels most fearsome, is right there in front of us. Now, in common mythologies, that would actually be an external foe or an external force or an external event. So, for example, for us in our yogic mythology, I think of Hanuman facing the evil demon Ravana and having to battle that evil demon in a way that seems like there's no way Hanuman could win. He doesn't have the resources. He's just a little monkey. How could Hanuman possibly win against this giant demon, Ravana? But of course, it is a mythology, and so Hanuman does prevail. But in our own lives, we will face either demons, dragons, or monsters, or otherwise. And whether it's a person outside of us or some event, it really isn't about that external force. It really isn't about the dragon. The way in which we prevail or overcome is through our own fortitude, through essentially conquering our own fear. I've always loved the saying that the difference between the hero and the coward is that the hero does it anyway. They're both afraid. It's just that the hero goes forth and does it. And normally it's because the hero has something greater than him or herself to believe in or to fight for. The hero remembers who he or she left back home. The hero has a passion or a purpose or a cause to transform or change. If that isn't present, if the hero is just doing this for him or herself, it's too easy to give up. So in this dark night of the soul moment, really, even if there is some sort of external force or foe, it's the internal transformation that is the most important. Once the hero has gone ahead and overcome the demon, then what they are left with are the tools for the next step or stage. And this is the ability to come back to what was once the, quote, normal or known world, but they now come back as a transformed hero with all sorts of tools or knowledge or compassion or gifts to bring back to the community. So I want to go back and talk a little bit about these last few stages in terms of our yoga practice, because again, that's who we are. And truly this hero's journey, yes, while it plays out on the big screen or in books or through mythology, the reason why it intrigues us or enlivens us is because we resonate with, because the hero's journey is an innate, personal, psychological journey. That's why they're powerful. They help us to evolve. They give us context for the journey. In fact, they help us understand the great cycle. So as yogis, we might know about the mythology of Shiva. And one of Shiva's most popular known forms is Nataraja. In fact, we have an asana for this particular form of Shiva. It is dancer's pose, Natarajasana. And when we see Natarajasana depicted, he's within a great wheel of fire. And this is the wheel of the hero's journey. This is the cycle of that spiritual journey. We start at the very top of that cycle and we move counterclockwise to the left. It's always an undoing in terms of the psyche. And then there are moments where we're at the bottom of that wheel of just being crushed. And that's our dark night of the soul. But eventually we do emerge. And throughout our lives, we go through many different cycles, many different hero's journeys. We might have little mini journeys within a great big one throughout the arc of our lives. Understanding those different steps and phases, I'm hoping, will give you the fortitude and the ability to persevere if you know that you're in a specific stage. Of course, the most challenging one is the dark night of the soul, which is preceded by the road of trials. Many people give up. Many people fall off the wheel at that stage, never to become the hero. Now, I'm not chastising in any way, but I am pointing out that this is how your own spiritual potential is achieved. Shadow work is required. It just is. That's how spiritual transformation occurs. And that is the name of the game for us as spiritual practitioners. We are here to transform. We are here for our soul's unfoldment. And that will require us to examine things that, well, mere mortals would never examine. Those perhaps not on a hero's journey or not on our hero's journey may not take a look at the things we're examining. We're engaged in shadow work as spiritual journeyers. We are engaged in taking a look at the things that other people might ignore or choose not to. We seek out wise mentors to help us at certain points along the path, but we realize that at some point we must go it alone, that this is part of our spiritual unfoldment. So what I would love is for you, as you're listening, is to identify which stage of the hero's journey you are in at this moment. Perhaps you are starting out in the known world and just beginning your journey. Perhaps you've really hit some walls and you're going through the road of trials. Perhaps you're looking for deep inspiration because all feels lost at the moment. And you know then that you're in the dark night of the soul. Or perhaps you've just gone through a cycle and you've learned something about yourself and now it's time to bring that gift back to the world. This is critically important for us as teachers and spiritual leaders because we can only take people as far as we ourselves have gone. We must have gone through some cycles of this hero's journey in order to lead people through their own cycles. We can't lead people farther than we've gone ourselves. That's the gift. That's the reintegration back to society once we've gone through the road of trials and the dark night of the soul and we're able to come back and share our gifts with people. That's what creates greater mastery for us, greater leadership for us as yoga teachers and spiritual leaders. This psychological cycle, this hero's journey cycle is so important. And one of the ways for you to work with it is not just to study the steps. Certainly I can teach you the steps. You can read about the steps, but to really live the steps. I mentioned a little bit earlier that one of the things that we are encouraged to do by both Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung is to discover the myth that we live by. So perhaps for some homework, not just identifying which stage of the hero's journey you are in, but perhaps exploring different stories or myths that truly light you up from the inside. And that may evolve or change throughout your life, but if you see or read a story or a myth, and there's a character, a hero in that myth that you completely identify with, you may identify it as the myth you are living by at this moment. And that gives you context. That gives you understanding for what the next steps may be, or what the inherent lesson in that particular myth is, or whether you need to open your heart further, or dig a little deeper, or learn a little bit more. These myths are instructive. They are enlivening and enlightening. And isn't that what we all want as yogis? That enlightenment? So I hope that you've enjoyed this short overview of the hero's journey, introduction to some mythological concepts as a spiritual leader. There is so much richness within mythology and storytelling, and I hope that this will inspire you to take that knowledge further and to explore more deeply how the hero's journey works within your own life. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I hope that you'll give it all the stars on whichever podcast host you have downloaded it. That not only makes me feel amazing and thank you, but it also helps others to find this podcast and widen our net of spiritual leadership because so many are being called to do this work. If you'd like to continue this discussion, I hope that you'll join me for a $1 2-week trial inside the highereducation.yoga membership. This is where your community is. Head over to highereducation.yoga/trial and join us. I'll look forward to seeing you around my community, and until next time, namaste.